A bitter winter night presses against a small, trembling world where a mother battles despair with nothing but courage and the last crust of bread. Her child's whispered hope for a Christmas miracle hangs in the air like a fragile prayer, one she fears she cannot answer. Yet destiny stirs beyond the thin walls, carrying the echo of a past long buried and a future she never dared to imagine. When a stranger's knock shatters the silence, everything she thought she knew is put to the test. Before we begin, tell me, from where are you listening tonight? And what do you love most about period romances? The snow fell in thick, unrelenting sheets outside the cramped tenement window, blanketing New York City's Lower East Side in a deceptive hush. Inside, the air hung heavy with the chill that seeped through the cracks in the walls, no matter how many threadbare rags Emily Hargrove stuffed into them. She knelt by the rickety table, her hands trembling as she sliced the last heel of stale bread with a dull knife. The loaf was more crumb than sustenance, bought with the pennies she'd scrimped from mending hems for the wealthier ladies uptown, ladies who tossed their cast-offs like they meant nothing. Her son, little Noah, only 7 years old, sat on the edge of their single pallet bed, his wide blue eyes fixed on her with a hunger that twisted her heart sharper than any blade. His cheeks, once round with the promise of childhood, were hollow now, shadowed by the flickering light of a single tallow candle. The room was bare, a sagging iron stove cold and silent, a few patched quilts and a chipped basin for washing. No tree, no garlands, no whisper of the holiday cheer that echoed from the grand homes on Fifth Avenue. Christmas Eve, and this was all she could offer. "Mama," Noah said softly, his voice small against the wind's howl. "When's dinner? I'm so hungry." He pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around them as if to hold in the warmth his thin shirt couldn't provide. Emily's throat tightened. She remembered Christmases past, back in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania before her husband Jacob had been taken by the fever 3 winters ago. Jacob, with his strong hands and easy laugh, promising they'd make a life in the city. Now it was just them, scraping by in this iron jungle where the rich grew richer on the backs of folks like her. She forced a smile, sliding the bread toward him on a tin plate, alongside a cup of water, drawn from the communal pump downstairs, murky, tasting of rust. "Here, my sweet boy, it's our special Christmas bread. Remember how Papa used to say bread was the staff of life?" Her voice cracked, but she held his gaze, willing him to believe the lie. Noah nodded slowly, picking at the crust, his small teeth tearing off tiny pieces. Each bite he took felt like a dagger to her soul. How had it come to this? She'd sold her wedding ring last month, pawned it for rent, and still the landlord pounded on the door every dawn. Tears blurred her vision as she watched him eat. Emily was 32, but the years had etched lines around her eyes and mouth, her once vibrant auburn hair dulled by the coal dust that permeated everything. She wore a faded calico dress, mended so many times the seams whispered of desperation, and a shawl that had been her mother's, its fringes frayed like her hopes. In the Gilded Age, they called it, this era of opulent mansions and robber barons, but for her, it was gilded with nothing but guilt and grime. The newspapers raved of Vanderbilts and Astors feasting on turkey and plum pudding, while families like hers fought for scraps. Noah finished the bread, licking his fingers clean, then looked up with that innocent trust that broke her anew. "Mama, will Santa come, even if we don't have a chimney?" The tenement's flue was clogged, belching smoke when it worked at all. Emily gathered him into her arms, the scent of unwashed wool and faint soap clinging to them both. "Of course he will, Noah. Santa knows the good hearts in this world. He sees how brave you are." But as the clock in the hall struck 8, the weight of the night pressed down. No miracles, no magic, Just the endless grind tomorrow, more sewing by gaslight, dodging the leering eyes of the factory overseers, praying Noah wouldn't fall ill like so many children did in these streets. She rocked him gently, humming a lullaby her mother had sung, the melody fracturing in the cold air. Then a knock echoed through the door, sharp, insistent, not the usual rough rap of the landlord or a neighbor begging coal. Emily froze, her pulse quickening. Who could it be at this hour, on Christmas Eve? She rose, clutching Noah behind her, and cracked the door open to the dim hallway, lit by a sputtering lantern. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, his overcoat dusted with snow, a silk top hat in his gloved hands. His face was stern, lined by years of command, but his eyes, dark and piercing, held an unexpected flicker of something softer. Behind him, two burly figures waited, carrying lanterns that cast long shadows. He was no tenement dweller. His boots were polished, his woolen scarf fine cashmere. This was a man of means, thrust into her world like a thunderclap. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep and measured, carrying the clipped accent of old money, "I'm Alexander Thorne. Forgive the intrusion, but I've reason to believe you are Emily Hargrove, widow of Jacob Hargrove, the engineer from the Pennsylvania rails." He paused, glancing past her to Noah, who peeked out wide-eyed. "May I come in? There's a matter of grave importance that concerns you both, one that could change everything this Christmas night." Emily's hand gripped the doorframe, her mind reeling. Jacob's old employer, a debt collector, or something more? The wind howled outside, but inside a spark ignited. Hope, fragile as the candle flame, daring her to open the door wider. What secrets from her husband's past had followed her here, to this moment of utter despair? And could this stranger, this magnate from the glittering heights of society, truly be the answer to a mother's breaking heart? As she stepped aside, inviting him in, the snow swirled through the threshold, carrying with it the promise of a story yet untold, a tale of rags and riches, loss and redemption, in the shadowed underbelly of America's golden age. Alexander Thorne stepped into the dim room, his presence filling the space like a sudden draught from a grand ballroom. He removed his top hat, holding it under one arm, and nodded politely to Emily as the door clicked shut behind him. The two men outside remained in the hallway, their lanterns casting flickering light through the transom. Noah clung to Emily's skirt, his small face a mix of curiosity and fear, eyes darting from the stranger's fine clothes to the snow melting on the floorboards. Emily smoothed her apron, suddenly aware of the threadbare state of everything, the peeling wallpaper, the empty hearth, the single candle sputtering on the table. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "What brings a gentleman like you to our door on Christmas Eve? If it's about Jacob's old wages, I assure you we've received nothing but echoes from the railroad company." Thorne's gaze softened as he took in the room, then settled on Noah. "No, ma'am, this isn't about debts owed to me, quite the opposite." He pulled a chair from the table, the legs scraping against the worn floor, and gestured for her to sit. Emily hesitated, then perched on the edge of the pallet, pulling Noah onto her lap. Thorne remained standing, his posture straight as a rail spike, a habit from years of overseeing vast enterprises in steel and steam. "Allow me to explain," he continued, his tone measured, like a man accustomed to boardrooms rather than tenements. "Your husband, Jacob Hargrove, worked under my supervision on the Pennsylvania lines 5 years back. He was a fine engineer, sharp mind, honest to a fault. Before his passing, he entrusted me with a package, sealed instructions to be delivered only if times turned dire for you and the boy. I tracked you here through old records and a few discreet inquiries in the city directories." Emily's breath caught. Jacob had mentioned favors from his bosses, but nothing like this. Her mind raced back to those early days in New York after the funeral. She'd arrived with Noah bundled in her arms, a trunk of belongings and dreams of stability. The city had swallowed them whole. By day, she toiled in a sweatshop off Hester Street, her fingers flying over sewing machines that clattered like iron hearts, producing corsets and collars for the elite who never saw the hands that made them. Evenings brought mending for neighbours, Irish immigrants like the O'Learys next door, who shared potatoes when they had them, or the Italian family downstairs, whose children played stickball in the alleys until the gas lamps flickered on. The hierarchy of the Gilded Age pressed down like the weight of the elevated trains rumbling overhead. Uptown, the Astors and Carnegies built palaces of marble and gilt, their wives draped in Worth gowns from Paris, attending operas where diamonds outshone the chandeliers. Downtown, folks like Emily navigated a world of pushcarts and peddlers, where Tammany Hall bosses doled out coal in exchange for votes, and the air reeked of horse manure and factory smoke. Etiquette was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her interactions were hurried nods to the forewoman, a stern widow named Mrs. Callahan, who docked pay for every tardy minute, or polite deflections to the landlord, Mr. Finkel, whose watery eyes lingered too long. Thorne reached into his overcoat and produced a leather pouch, heavy with the clink of coins. Jacob saved this from his bonuses, gold eagles, enough to cover rent for a year and passage out of this place if needed. But there's more. He set the pouch on the table, then withdrew a folded letter, its wax seal unbroken, bearing Jacob's careful script. He wrote this for you, Emily. Said to give it when the winter bit deepest. Tonight qualifies, I reckon. Her hands shook as she took the letter, the paper crisp against her calloused fingers. Noah leaned forward, whispering, "Is it from Papa? Does he say Merry Christmas?" Emily nodded, tears welling, but she didn't break the seal yet. The room felt warmer, the candle flame dancing higher, as if sensing the shift. For the first time in months, hope flickered, not just survival, but possibility. Thorne watched her, his stern features cracking into a rare half-smile. Jacob spoke highly of you, said you had fire in your spirit, the kind that built this nation. They talked then, halting at first. Thorne described the railroad's expansion, how men like Jacob laid tracks that connected coasts, fueling the boom of 1885. He spoke of his own life, a self-made magnate from Boston stock, widowed young, with no children to inherit his fortune. Emily shared snippets of her days, the ache in her back from the sewing bench, the way Noah collected bottle caps as treasures, dreaming of the day he'd ride a real train. Laughter escaped her lips when Noah demonstrated his engine with a wooden spoon, chugging across the table. Thorne chuckled, a deep rumble, and for a moment the tenement walls faded. But as the clock neared 10, a shadow crossed Thorne's face. He glanced at the door, then back to Emily. This aid comes with a condition, one Jacob insisted on. He believed in lifting kin, but not without purpose. There's a position in my household uptown, a governess for my niece, orphaned last spring. Steady pay, room and board, for you and the boy. It would mean leaving this behind, entering a world of strict codes, curtsies, calling cards, the endless round of teas and soirees. But it's a step up, Emily, a chance. She stared at the letter in her lap, heart pounding. Uptown, among the silk stocking set. The divide was vast, a chasm of class that swallowed ambitions whole. Whispers from the sweatshop warned of maids dismissed for a misplaced glance, of hierarchies where one wrong word meant the street again. Yet, for Noah, for bread that wasn't stale, for a coat that fit, could she refuse? Before she could answer, a sharp rap echoed from the hallway. One of Thorne's men poked his head in, face pale. "Sir, trouble outside. Some roughs from the ward say they've been watching the building, mentioned a widow with a boy owing back rent. They're armed with clubs, demanding to see her now." Thorne's jaw tightened, hand instinctively going to his coat pocket where a derringer lightly waited. Emily clutched Noah closer, the fragile warmth of the evening shattering like thin ice. What shadows from her past had stirred, and why tonight, when salvation seemed so close? As shouts rose from the street below, she realized Jacob's gift might come wrapped in thorns, pulling her into a web far deadlier than the tenement's grip. The shouts from the street below grew louder, a guttural chorus cutting through the night like shards of broken glass. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs as she peered out the grimy window, her arms tightening around Noah. Torchlight flickered up from the alley, illuminating a knot of men in rough woolen caps and patched coats. Gang members from the 5 Points, their faces twisted in the shadows. The leader, a burly figure with a scarred cheek, brandished a club, barking orders at Thorne's men, who stood firm but outnumbered. "Stay back!" Thorne commanded his escorts in a low growl, his hand slipping inside his overcoat. He turned to Emily, his eyes sharp with calculation. "These are Finkel's enforcers, your landlord's way of collecting what's owed. Jacob's letter mentions arrears from the move, something about a guarantee he left behind, but we can't face them here, not like this." Noah whimpered, burying his face in Emily's shoulder. The air in the room thickened, the earlier warmth evaporating like morning mist. Emily's mind spun. Back rent? She'd paid what she could, scraping together every cent from her sewing, but the winter had been merciless. Coal prices doubled, and illness had kept her from work for a week. Finkel had threatened eviction before, but never with fists and fire. This felt orchestrated, a trap sprung on Christmas Eve when the police patrolled lighter. Thorne moved to the door, signaling his men with a curt nod. "We'll handle them. But you must decide now, Mrs. Hargrove. Come with us to my carriage. It's waiting 2 blocks over, out of sight. The position I offer isn't just charity. It's a contract. Jacob arranged it as a safeguard. Accept, and I'll square the debt tonight. Refuse, and—" He trailed off, glancing at the pouch of gold on the table. The implication hung heavy. The streets would claim them by dawn. Emily's hesitation clawed at her. Uptown life? She'd heard the tales from other widows, maids who curtsied until their backs ached, governesses bound by ironclad rules. No personal visitors, no unsupervised outings, endless deference to the family's whims. Social vigilance was the price of entry. One misstep, a whispered rumor of impropriety, and you'd be cast out, blacklisted from every respectable house. And Alexander Thorne, he was no benevolent uncle. His reputation preceded him in the society pages, ruthless in boardrooms, a widower whose steel mills powered the nation's rails, yet whispered to be as cold as the forges he commanded. Allies? Perhaps his niece, young Eliza, in need of care? Mentors? Thorne himself, with his clipped directives, but antagonists lurked already. Finkel, and whoever pulled his strings in the corrupt web of Tammany Hall. I can't just leave," Emily whispered, her voice cracking. The social cost loomed like a spectre, abandoning neighbors who'd shared their last potato, stepping into a world where her calico dress would mark her as an intruder. Yet Noah's small hands clutched her, his breath ragged. Concrete obstacles piled up. The debt now weaponized, the protocol of Thorne's household with its formal teas and calling hours, the slander that could follow if she fled like a debtor in the night. A crash echoed from below, wood splintering, likely the tenement's outer gate giving way. Thorne's man burst back in, breathless. "They're coming up the stairs, sir. 5 of them. Clubs raised, we can fight, but it'll draw the watch and questions we don't need." Thorne's jaw set like granite. Enough. He scooped the pouch and letter into his satchel, then extended a gloved hand to Emily. "The choice is yours, but make it swift. My world has rules, discretion above all. You'll sign a simple agreement, loyal service for fair wage, no entanglements outside the household. In return, protection for you and the boy. This is the rupture, Emily. The old life ends here." Tears stung her eyes, but resolve hardened in her chest. For Noah's future, for the chance at warm meals, books for his curious mind, a roof without leaks. She nodded. We'll come, but on our terms too. No secrets. I need to know what Jacob truly intended. Thorne's expression flickered. Approval, perhaps, or something deeper. Fair enough. He wrapped Noah in his own cashmere scarf, the fabric soft against the boy's chilled skin, and guided Emily toward a back exit the enforcers hadn't spotted. They slipped down a narrow stairwell, hearts pounding, emerging into the blizzard-shrouded alley. Thorne's carriage waited, a sleek brougham with brass lanterns glowing like beacons, horses stamping impatiently. His men formed a wedge, clubs at the ready, as they bundled inside. The vehicle lurched forward, wheels crunching over snow-packed cobblestones, leaving the tenement and the shouts fading behind. Emily held Noah close, the letter burning in her pocket like a brand. As the city lights blurred past, from dingy gas lamps to the brighter glow of Broadway, she felt the status quo shatter. No more sweatshop drudgery. Instead, the gilded cage awaited, with its etiquettes and eyes everywhere. Thorne sat opposite, silent at first, then spoke softly. You'll meet Eliza tomorrow. She's 10, sharp as a tack, but grieving her parents' loss in a carriage accident last year. Your role, tutor her in letters, manners, the world beyond these walls. My household runs like clockwork, dinners at 7, church on Sundays, no tolerance for laxity. Emily absorbed the rules, the new world's vigilance pressing in. Obstacles already nipped, whispers of her sudden arrival could breed slander among the servants, vetoes from Thorne's stuffy aunt, who oversaw the staff. The debt now a chain, linking her to him. Yet as Noah dozed against her, a spark of defiance kindled. This was her call to rise, not just survive. But as the carriage climbed toward Central Park's edge, a horseman detached from the shadows, galloping parallel for a block before veering off into the night. Thorne noticed, his hand tensing on the seat. We're watched. Finkel's not done, or someone higher up isn't. Emily's blood ran cold. What alliance had Jacob forged that now hunted her? And in accepting Thorne's hand, had she traded one peril for a deadlier game, one that could upend her world forever? The carriage rattled to a halt before the imposing facade of Thorne's brownstone on the edge of Gramercy Park, its gas lamps casting a golden glow over polished steps and wrought iron railings. Emily clutched Noah's hand as they descended. The boy's eyes widening at the sight of the 4-story mansion, red brick warmed by climbing ivy, windows framed in lace curtains that whispered of worlds she'd only glimpsed in shop windows. The blizzard had eased to a light flurry, but the cold bit deeper now, carrying the scent of coal fires from chimneys that belched smoke like contented dragons. Thorne led them through a side entrance, away from the grand oak doors that fronted the street. A butler, gaunt and proper in his black tailcoat, took their wraps without a word, his eyes flicking over Emily's calico dress with the barest arch of a brow. No questions, but the judgment hung in the air like fog. Inside, the hallway stretched long and panelled in dark walnut, lit by wall sconces that flickered softly. The air smelled of beeswax polish and faint lavender, luxuries that made Emily's stomach twist with unease. Noah tugged her sleeve, whispering, "Mama, it's like a palace. Is this our new home?" "For now, yes," Thorne replied, his voice echoing slightly off the marble floor. He glanced at her, a subtle nod of reassurance. "Mrs. Hargrove, you'll have rooms on the 3rd floor with Eliza. Settle in. Breakfast at 8 sharp. We'll discuss the terms then." He turned toward a study door but paused, his gloved hand on the knob. For a moment, their eyes met, his dark gaze holding hers longer than propriety allowed, a silent acknowledgement of the chaos they'd fled. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut. A maid, young and starched in her cap and apron, appeared to guide them upstairs. Her name was Bridget, Irish lilt softening her words as she chattered about the house routines, bells for service, no wandering after dark, curtsies for guests. Emily nodded, absorbing the new etiquette like a sponge. The rigid hierarchies, the unspoken rules that divided servants from family. Her role as governess blurred those lines, a precarious perch between worlds. Noah bounced on his toes, enchanted by the thick carpets that muffled their steps, but Emily felt the weight of eyes, portraits of stern ancestors lining the walls, watching her ascent. Their rooms were modest, but worlds apart from the tenement. A bedchamber with crisp linens, a small sitting area warmed by a crackling fire, and an adjoining nursery for Noah stacked with wooden toys and shelves of books. Eliza waited there, a slip of a girl with Thorne's sharp features and auburn curls tied in ribbons. 10 years old, she sat by the window, sketching in a leather-bound journal, her black morning dress severe against her pale skin. She looked up as they entered, her green eyes assessing Emily with a mix of wariness and hope. "You're the new governess?" Eliza asked, setting aside her pencil. Her voice was clear, educated, laced with the polish of private tutors. "Uncle Alex said you'd come from the city. Do you know stories from the streets? Real ones, not the sanitized kind." Emily smiled, kneeling to Noah's level first, helping him explore a toy train set that mimicked the Pennsylvania lines. "I do, and I'll teach you letters, history, perhaps even a bit of French if you're willing." She rose, extending a hand. Eliza took it hesitantly, her small palm cool. In that touch, Emily sensed the girl's isolation. Orphaned by a runaway horse on the drive from Saratoga last spring, thrust into this echoing house with an uncle more at ease with ledgers than lullabies. The first days blurred into a rhythm of lessons and observation. Mornings brought porridge and tea in the sunlit breakfast room, where Thorne joined them briefly, his newspaper folded precisely, discussing the day's headlines, railroad strikes in Pittsburgh, Vanderbilt's latest merger. Emily dressed in the provided uniform, a grey wool gown with high neck and long sleeves, modest but finer than her old calico, its skirts whispering against the polished floors. She mended it herself at night, her needle steady, despite the ache of adjustment. By week's end the test came, a semi-public gathering, a modest tea in the parlour for Thorne's business associates and their wives. Not a grand ball, but a proving ground nonetheless. Ladies in bustled silks and feathered hats, gentlemen with watch chains glinting like gold veins. Emily was to oversee Eliza, blending into the background yet visible, her poise under scrutiny. As guests arrived, the air filled with the clink of porcelain and murmurs of stock prices. Emily stood by the piano, guiding Eliza through a simple scale to entertain. The friction started subtly. Mrs. Pendleton, a pinched-faced widow in puce satin, eyed Emily over her fan. "Thorne's new hire, I presume. From downtown, they say. How enterprising." The words dripped with class disdain, a subtle humiliation that made Emily's cheeks burn. Whispers rippled. "Widow with a child. Unconventional." Noah, playing quietly in the corner with wooden blocks, didn't notice, but Eliza did, her fingers faltering on the keys. Thorne, circulating with a tray of cigars, caught the exchange. He moved closer, his presence a shield. "Mrs. Pendleton," he said evenly, "Mrs. Hargrove's expertise in education is unmatched. Eliza's progressed remarkably in days." It was a minimal defense, no grand proclamation, but his tone brooked no argument. His eyes met Emily's again, a brief brush of warmth amid the chill, gratitude perhaps, or the stirrings of something more. She nodded thanks, her hand steadying Eliza's on the piano bench, their shoulders touching in shared resolve. Later, as the guest departed in a flurry of calling cards, Eliza pulled a small brooch from her pocket, a silver locket with a miniature portrait of her mother, its clasp worn from young fingers. "This was hers," the girl said softly, pinning it to Emily's sleeve, "for luck. You made them listen today." The object gleamed, initiating a quiet bond. Its weight a symbol of trust, earned. Emily's heart swelled, a small emotional advance. In the silence of the emptying parlour, Thorne lingered, watching them. No words, just a shared glance over the girl's head. Prolonged, charged with unspoken understanding, his hand grazed hers as he handed her a cup of tea, the touch electric, fleeting. But shadows gathered. As Emily retired that evening, Bridget slipped her a folded note from the kitchen door. "Watched from the park, that horseman again, word spreading, your old landlord's kin in the wards, sniffing for scandal." Emily crumpled it, pulse racing. The antagonist lurked, observing from the fringes, ready to strike. By morning, a society column in the Times would whisper of the mysterious newcomer at Thorne's tea, planting seeds of doubt. How long before the frictions ignited into flame, threatening the fragile bridge she'd crossed? The blizzard returned with a vengeance 2 weeks after the tea, whipping through Gramercy Park like an unbridled fury from the north. Emily stood at the nursery window, watching snow pile against the iron fences, her breath fogging the glass. Lessons with Eliza had wrapped early. The girl dozed in her armchair, locket clutched in her fist, exhausted from reciting Latin conjugations. Noah played nearby, stacking blocks into a wobbly tower that mimicked the mansion's spires. The house creaked under the wind's assault, drafts sneaking through despite the heavy drapes. Downstairs, Thorne's voice boomed from the study, issuing orders to his foreman via telegraph about delayed steel shipments. The storm had snarled the rails, stranding workers and halting progress on his latest mill expansion. Emily felt the isolation settle, a forced confinement that mirrored her inner turmoil. Since the tea, whispers had circled, servants' gossip about her sudden elevation, a vague item in the Herald hinting at Thorne's charitable whims. She'd caught Thorne's gaze lingering during meals, his stern facade cracking with questions about her Pennsylvania roots, but propriety kept them at arm's length. A sharp gust rattled the panes and thunder cracked overhead, rare for winter, but the squall carried lightning's flash. Eliza stirred, murmuring in her sleep. "Stay put," Emily told Noah, tucking a quilt around the girl. She descended to check the kitchen fires, but the storm's roar grew, and a servant reported the back gate torn from its hinges. Powerless against nature's siege, the household hunkered down, candles lit against the gathering dark. By evening, the winds howled fiercer, uprooting a tree that crashed onto the carriage house roof with a splintering thud. Shouts echoed from below, Thorne directing men to secure the stables, his overcoat slick with melt. Emily gathered the children in the library, the room's high ceilings and leather-bound shelves offering a sanctuary of sorts. She lit the hearth, flames dancing on portraits of Thorne's forebears. Stern industrialists who'd forged fortunes from iron and ambition. Thorne burst in then, snow crusting his boots, face flushed from the cold. "The lines are down, no telegraph, no runners. We're cut off till morning." He shook off his coat, revealing a crisp white shirt rolled to the elbows, sleeves damp. His eyes swept the room, lingering on Emily as she arranged cushions by the fire. Noah clapped at the spectacle, but Eliza woke fully, her face paling at the thunder's rumble. "Sit," Emily said softly, pouring tea from a silver service left earlier. Thorne hesitated, then sank into an armchair opposite her, the firelight carving shadows across his lined brow. The children settled nearby, Noah with a picture book, Eliza sketching storms. Confinement wove them together, the storm's fury outside, forcing intimacy in the glow within. As rain lashed the windows, conversation turned halting. "This reminds me of the blizzards back home," Emily ventured, stirring her cup. "Jacob and I once holed up in a rail shanty for days. He read aloud from Dickens to pass the time, tales of hardship turned to hope." Her voice caught, the memory surfacing like a wound reopened. Thorn nodded, staring into the flames. Loss shapes us, doesn't it? My wife, Clara, she went in 82, consumption. I buried myself in the mills after, thinking work could fill the silence. He paused, the admission raw, humanizing the magnate who'd seemed carved from steel. Emily met his gaze, seeing the grief etched deep, a mirror to her own luto for Jacob, the fever that stole him mid-laugh, leaving her adrift in a city that devoured the weak. Eliza piped up, clutching her locket. Mama sang when storms came. Hymns mostly. The girl rose, crossing to the pianoforte in the corner, a rosewood grand, its keys ivory smooth. She coaxed out a simple melody, Rock of Ages, her small voice joining the notes. The music anchored them, peeling back layers. Eliza's orphan ache, Noah's innocent wonder, Emily's guarded heart. Thorn's fingers drummed the armrest, then stilled. He joined in softly, his baritone rumbling like distant thunder, revealing a tenderness buried under years of command. Emily watched him, the fire warming her cheeks. As the song faded, he leaned forward, voice low. Jacob saved my life once, pulled me from a derailment in 80. He spoke of you then, said your strength was the real fortune. The words bridged them, a tacit promise in his steady eyes. Protection, not pity. She reached for the poker to stir the logs, her hand brushing his as he offered to help. The touch lingered a beat too long, electric without crossing lines. Shifting the air, trust blooming like embers to flame. Noah yawned, curling against her side, and Eliza dozed off mid-sketch. Thorn rose to fetch a blanket, draping it over the girl with unexpected gentleness. You've brought light here, Emily. To all of us. His words hung, a gesture that warmed deeper than the fire, forging confidence without haste. But as the storm peaked, a distant pounding echoed, not wind, but fists on the front door. Thorn tensed, moving to the window. Through the sheets of rain, a figure huddled on the stoop, a disheveled messenger, soaked and urgent, thrusting an envelope sealed with rough wax before vanishing into the night. Thorn retrieved it, breaking the seal by candlelight. His face darkened as he read. Finkel's man, he muttered. Handing it to Emily, the note was scrawled, threatening, Widow's debts don't vanish in mansions. Pay up, or the boy's past comes calling. Jacob's secrets from the rails. We know where you hide. Espionage's chill seeped in, the antagonist's signal clear, shadows closing, a Ricardo that chilled the budding warmth. Emily's hands trembled, the fragile trust fracturing. The storm raged on, but inside, the tide of emotion ebbed, pulling her toward peril anew. What buried truths from Jacob's days threatened to drag them under, just as hope dared to rise. The storm's fury lingered into the grey dawn, but the real tempest brewed within the walls of Thorn's brownstone. Emily clutched the crumpled note, its ink smudged by rain, as if holding it tighter could banish the threat. Jacob's secrets. What shadows from the rails had her husband buried, and why did they surface now, like weeds choking a fresh garden? She folded it away, tucking it into her pocket beside the unopened letter from Jacob, her fingers lingering on the wax seal. Trust, so newly kindled by the firelit confessions, now flickered under assault. Thorn paced the library, his boots thudding softly on the Persian rug, jaw clenched like a vice. Finkel's a pawn, he said, voice low and edged with steel. Tammany Hall pulls his strings, corrupt ward bosses who squeeze the poor for votes and coin. Your husband's old ties to the railroads. There were disputes over land grants, bribes skimmed from contracts. Jacob refused to play along, spoke out once. It cost him friends, maybe more. He stopped, eyes locking on hers. If they expose that, it taints you both. Scandals like this don't stay buried. They erupt in the papers, poison reputations overnight. Emily's stomach knotted. The warmth of the previous night, the shared song, the brush of hands, dissolved into cold dread. She'd crossed into this world for Noah's sake, But now it pulled her deeper, entangling her in webs she couldn't see. Downstairs, the household stirred. Bridget clattering pots in the kitchen, the butler murmuring to a delivery boy at the side door. Eliza and Noah still slept, oblivious. But isolation crept in, a subtle quarantine as servants cast sidelong glances, whispers threading through the halls like smoke. By midday, the attack came frontal and vicious. A courier arrived at the grand entrance, not the discreet side, deliberate for all to see, bearing a thick envelope stamped with the seal of a Bowery law firm. Thorne snatched it in the foyer, his face paling as he scanned the contents. "Chantage-em!" he growled, though the word hung foreign on his tongue. Blackmail, plain and brutal. Inside, affidavits from so-called witnesses claiming Jacob had embezzled rail funds, funneled them to union agitators. Fabricated, Thorne insisted, but damning on paper. Demands followed. $5,000 by week's end, or the documents went to the Times and every society salon, from here to Newport. Emily joined him in the study, the heavy oak door shutting out the world. Sunlight slanted through leaded windows, mocking the gloom. "They aim to wound us publicly," Thorne continued, slamming the papers down. "My mills rely on clean ledgers. Any whiff of scandal and investors bolt. For you, governess to Eliza, they'll paint you as complicit, a schemer hiding in my home. The alliance we built, your place here, crumbles." She sank into a leather chair, the creak echoing her fracturing resolve. Reputação ferida, the tea's subtle frictions would ignite into inferno. Ladies like Mrs. Pendleton would feast on the gossip, barring doors to Eliza's future matches, isolating Emily in a gilded exile. Noah's wide eyes haunted her. What world would he inherit if they cast her out? The antagonist ascended, not as a ghost, but a machine. Finkel's thugs backed by political vultures, sabotaging from the shadows with ink and lies. Thorne's hand rested on the desk, inches from hers, but he pulled back, the emotional rift widening. "I can't let this touch you," he said, voice strained. "Not after last night." Yet doubt seeped in, a quebra de confianza. Had Jacob's honor been a facade? Emily searched his face, seeing the Magnate's walls rebuild, duty over desire, protection through distance. "We'll fight it," she pressed, rising. "Prove the lies, witnesses, records, something from your files." He shook his head, the stern lines deepening. "Too risky. Exposure invites scrutiny on my operations. Unions are restless. One spark and strikes halt the rails." The equilibrio shattered, separating them not by miles, but by unspoken fears. She, the outsider, bore the brunt, status plummeting from tentative ally to liability. Servants avoided her at luncheon. Eliza's lessons halted with a note from the tutor. Until matters clear. Isolation wrapped tight, a valley of danger after the storm's false hope. The point of no return struck that afternoon, tangible and irreversible. A carriage pulled up outside, not Thorne's sleek brougham but a nondescript hackney, disgorging a reporter from the World, hat tipped low, notebook in hand. Word had leaked, the sabotage public now. He demanded entry, shouting through the door about the railroad widow's dark past. Thorne's men turned him away, but not before neighbors peered from curtains. The street buzzing like a hive disturbed. Emily watched from an upper window, heart pounding, no retreat possible. Fleeing would confirm guilt, chaining her forever to the tenement's grip. She confronted Thorne in the hall, voice fierce. "We face it together, or I walk now, take Noah and vanish." His eyes, once warm, hardened with the weight of empire. "You can't. Not without dragging us all down." The ultimato social loomed, stay and fight, risking everything, leave and lose the fragile family she'd woven. As dusk fell, Thorne retreated to his study, door barred. Emily gathered Noah and Eliza in the nursery, the children's questions piercing like arrows. "Mama, why's everyone quiet?" Noah asked, his small hand in hers. She forced a smile, but inside, exile brewed, emotional, from the man whose gaze had promised more. A final blow landed via telegram. Thorne's aunt, the family matriarch, wired from Boston. Dismiss the woman. Scandal unfit for Eliza. Perda de apoyo, swift and cutting. Emily stood alone at the window. Gramercy Park's lamps flickering to life. The antagonist's rise had severed the budding bond, hurling her into isolation's maw. But defiance stirred. What secrets did Jacob's letter hold, the one she'd yet to open? As Thorne's shadow passed the door without entering, she broke the seal at last, candlelight trembling on the page. Words leaped out. Proofs of innocence, a hidden ledger naming the true thieves, names tied to Tammany's elite. Her action now, confront or conceal. The web tightened, but in the breach, resolve ignited. Yet as footsteps echoed below, more visitors, perhaps bailiffs, she wondered if Thorne's withdrawal was final, exiling her heart even as the fight began. Emily's fingers trembled as she unfolded the yellowed pages in the dim nursery light, the candle's flame casting wavering shadows across Jacob's familiar script. The words poured out like a long-buried river, accounts of rail deals twisted by greed, names scrawled in haste, Finkel's brother-in-law, a Tammany fixer named Harlan Crow, siphoning funds meant for workers' safety. Jacob had documented it all, a hidden ledger tucked in the letter's folds, receipts pinned like accusations. "My love," he wrote, "if shadows follow, know the truth. Thorne can help expose them. Protect Noah. Trust your fire." Proofs at last, letters from honest foremen, a faded sketch of rigged contracts. No embezzlement, just a good man's stand against corruption. Her breath steadied. This wasn't guilt weighing Thorne down. It was duty, the same that had chained him since Clara's death, building empires to outrun loss. The coldness she'd sensed, a shield, cracked now by their shared storm. She slipped the ledger into her bodice, resolve igniting like struck flint. No more hiding. Finkel and his puppet masters had wounded her world enough, starving families, broken homes, all for a fistful of bribes. Indignation surged, hot and righteous. How dare they prey on widows, twist justice for votes? The public would see, or she'd make them. Downstairs the house thrummed with tension. Servants whispered in the scullery, forks clinking nervously at dinner. Eliza picked at her peas, eyes darting to Emily. "Uncle says no lessons tomorrow. Is it because of the bad men?" Noah clutched his spoon like a sword, silent for once. Thorne entered late, his tie loosened, face etched with fatigue from hours poring over ledgers. He nodded curtly, avoiding her gaze, the emotional chasm widening. But Emily couldn't wait. She rose, the chair scraping like a declaration. "Alexander," she said, voice clear in the heavy silence, "we need to talk. Now." The children froze. He paused, fork midway, then gestured to the adjoining parlor. They stepped in, the door shutting with a soft click. Gas lamps hissed softly, illuminating shelves of leather-bound volumes. Thackeray, Dickens, testaments to a life of ordered ambition. She pulled the ledger free, slapping it on the mahogany table. Jacob's truth. Crow and Finkel rigged the bids, pocketed the rest. Your rails nearly collapsed because of it. Lives lost, like that derailment you mentioned. Thorne's eyes widened, scanning the pages. His hand gripped the edge, knuckles white. This changes everything I suspected, but proof? Ironclad. A peak of hope crested. He reached for her hand, squeezing once, firm and warm. Not passion's fire, but trust's steady glow. "You've given us a weapon, Emily. I was distant to protect you from my world, my regrets. Clara died in a mill accident, one I could have prevented. Guilt blinded me, but you see through it." She nodded, the reapproximation subtle, a bridge rebuilt in glances and shared breath. "Then fight with me, not from shadows." But the valley plunged swift. A knock rattled the door. Bridget, pale-faced, thrust in a telegram. Thorne read it aloud, voice dropping. Crow's response: leak the widow's role in the theft or pay double. Eliza's name dragged next. He's escalating, using the girl as bait. Danger loomed larger, the antagonist's claws sharpening. Emily's stomach twisted, indignation boiled over. Crow, that snake in silk, preying on orphans and the grieving. The public deserved to know his rot. No time for fear. Dawn broke crisp, the snow melting into slushy streets. Emily acted, agency surging like a tide. She penned a letter, not to Thorne, but to the editor of The Sun, a reformist rag that railed against Tammany's grip. A widow's account, she titled it, detailing the ledger's revelations with careful strokes. Dates, sums, Crow's signature on falsified deeds. No accusations against Thorne, instead a call for justice, framing her as a mother's voice against corruption. She sealed it with wax from the study desk, then approached Eliza in the morning room. "Help me," Emily said, handing the girl a ribbon-tied packet of copies. "Deliver this to the post yourself, with your uncle's footman for safety. Show the world we're not afraid." Eliza's eyes lit, the locket glinting as she nodded. For Mama, she'd want this. The action rippled outward, altering perceptions. By noon, Bridget confided, "The staff's buzzing, ma'am. They see you standing tall." Even the butler tipped his hat deeper. Thorne found her in the library, the Sun's afternoon edition clutched in his hand. No, not yet published, but word spread via couriers. "Bold," he murmured, a rare smile cracking his facade. He stepped closer, their shoulders brushing as they pored over a map of rail lines. Plotting next moves. Trust deepened, a quiet rekindling. His fingers traced a route near hers, lingering. Crow's furious, sent a thug to the gates, turned away, but he's rallying allies. Expect backlash at the assembly tomorrow. Hope peaked again, their alliance solidifying, but the threat swelled. Whispers from the street, a carriage idling suspiciously outside. Emily straightened, chin high. Her initiative had shifted the board, social eyes turning from pity to respect, servants nodding approval, even a note from Mrs. Pendleton. Intriguing stand. Tea soon? But Crow's Valley struck hard. A forged diary page arrived by messenger, claiming Jacob's complicity, smeared with Emily's name. "They'll use it at the chamber meeting," Thorne warned, face grim. "Rail barons gather. Vanderbilt's men, my rivals. If we don't counter—" Indignation peaked, the public's outrage building against the villain's web of lies. Families ruined for profit. Yet in the tension their bond reframed fully. Thorne pulled her aside in the hall, voice low. "I was cold from fear of loss. No more. We're in this, equals." A contained warmth, trust over ardor, sealed with a steady gaze. As evening fell, an invitation arrived, a summons to the merchants' assembly at the Astor House, decisive and public. Crow would be there, scheming in the smoke-filled halls. Emily pocketed Jacob's portrait from the letter, a small talisman. The confrontation loomed, hearts racing toward the fray. The gas lamps of Broadway flickered like hesitant stars as the Thorne carriage rolled toward the Astor House, the city's pulse thrumming through the crisp autumn air. Emily sat rigid, her grey silk gown, borrowed from Eliza's wardrobe and altered by Bridget's deft hands, clinging to her frame like a second skin. The high neck and modest bustle felt foreign, a armor against the eyes that would soon dissect her. Noah stayed behind with the children's nurse, safe in the brownstone, but Eliza had insisted on coming, her small hand gripping Emily's. "For justice," the girl had whispered, locket pinned to her own dress like a badge. Alexander Thorne sat opposite, his tailcoat impeccable, starched collar framing a jaw set in determination. No words passed between them during the ride, but his gaze met hers often, Steady, reassuring, a silent vow forged in the library's lamplight. The assembly loomed, a gathering of rail barons and merchants in the hotel's grand ballroom, ostensibly to toast expansions. But Emily knew better. Harlan Crowe would be there, slithering among the cigar smoke and crystal, his forged diary ready to unleash. They arrived amid a swirl of carriages, liveried footmen swinging doors. The Astor's marble foyer echoed with laughter and the rustle of taffeta, chandeliers dripping light like molten gold. Gentlemen in white ties nodded to Thorne, their wives appraising Emily with fans fluttering like wary birds. Whispers trailed them. The railroad widow. Thorne's bold choice. Eliza curtsied flawlessly, but Emily felt the scrutiny burn, her Pennsylvania roots a brand beneath the finery. The ballroom sprawled vast, walls panelled in mahogany, tables laden with silver epergnes of fruit and champagne flutes bubbling like secrets. A string quartet soared at airs from Offenbach, masking the undercurrent of deals struck in corners. Crowe spotted them immediately, his paunch straining a brocade vest, eyes narrowing like a ferret's. He held court near the dais, surrounded by sycophants, Vanderbilt's underlings. Tammany whispers in pinstripes. In his hand, a slim dossier, its edges gilt-trimmed. Thorne guided them to a cluster of allies, honest engineers from the Pennsylvania lines, a reformist editor from the Sun, clutching Emily's letter like a talisman. "Your words stirred the pot, ma'am," he murmured, but Crowe's brought a witness, a foreman greased to swear Jacob took the bribes. Emily's pulse quickened. The sabotage unfolded as planned. Midway through toasts, Crowe rose, clearing his throat with theatrical coughs. The room hushed, glasses pausing mid-air. "Ladies and gentlemen," Crowe boomed, voice oily as lantern fuel, "we celebrate progress tonight, but shadows linger. I bring proofs of betrayal in our ranks." He waved the dossier, stepping to the podium. "Jacob Hargrove, late engineer, siphoned funds meant for your rails, thousands funneled to agitators, and his widow." His gaze pinned Emily, venomous. "Hides here, scheming under Mr. Thorne's roof. I have a witness." He snapped his fingers. The bought foreman shuffled forward, cap twisting in sweaty hands. "Aye, Hargrove handed me the ledgers himself. Embezzlement plain." Gasps rippled, fans snapping shut. Mrs. Pendleton's lips curled in triumph, eyes darting to Emily like daggers. Eliza tense beside her, small fist clenching. Thorne's hand brushed Emily's arm, subtle support, his face a mask of controlled fury. The room tilted, reputations teetering on the foreman's lies. Crowe smirked, savoring the humiliation, his final strike aimed to shatter them. Exile for Emily, ruin for Thorne's mills, Eliza tainted by association. But Emily stepped forward, heart pounding like a locomotive, no shrinking violet now. "Mr. Crowe," she said, voice clear, carrying over the murmurs, "your proofs are forgeries, as any honest eye can see." She nodded to the editor, who rose, unfolding her letter and the ledger copies. Gasps turned to murmurs as he read aloud, dates, signatures, Crowe's own hand on falsified deeds. "This man," the editor declared, "pocketed the safety funds, causing derailments, deaths on the tracks. Jacob Hargrove exposed it, paid with his life's peace." Crowe blanched, sputtering. "Lies, that foreman." But Thorne moved then, signaling a side door. Two figures entered, real witnesses, foremen from Jacob's crew, faces weathered by honest toil. "We worked the lines with Hargrove," the elder said, voice gravelly. "He turned down Crowe's bribes, documented every twist. Here's the original manifest, stolen from our lockers last month. Proofs cascaded, the ledger, affidavits, even a crumpled receipt linking Crowe to Tammany's vaults." The room erupted, outrage crashing like waves. "Thief!" a Vanderbilt man shouted, slamming his glass. Women recoiled from Crow, skirts swirling away. Mrs. Pendleton's fan dropped, her face ashen. The editor seized the moment, calling for reform. End this corruption for the workers, the widows. Cheers swelled, hands clapping thunderously. Crow staggered back, dossier fluttering to the floor like shed skin, his allies melting into the crowd. Bailiffs appeared at the doors, summoned discreetly by Thorne, escorting him out amid jeers, his empire crumbling in the glare. Euphoria surged, electric and cathartic. Emily stood tall, the community's gaze shifting, from intruder to heroine, whispers turning to applause. "Brave soul," a matron murmured. Pressing her hand, Eliza beamed, hugging her waist. Thorne's eyes met Emily's across the throng, pride blazing, the walls between them dissolving in the victory's glow. The antagonist humiliated, his web torn, justice a resounding triumph that validated every scar, every step from the tenements' chill. As the quartet struck up a victorious waltz, the crowd dispersed in a haze of relief. Thorne drew Emily aside to a quiet alcove, Eliza trailing with a knowing smile. The noise faded, leaving a profound silence, the storm's echo stilled. "You did this," he whispered, his hand finding hers in the shadows, fingers intertwining with deliberate warmth, a tacit commitment, intimate and unspoken. "Not just for us, but for all the Jacobs out there." She squeezed back, the touch promising tomorrows unbound by fear. Their worlds merged in quiet resolve, yet as they slipped away, a final envelope waited in the carriage, a soft note from Crow's downfall, hinting at deeper roots. But tonight, victory reigned, hearts aligned in the afterglow. The carriage wheels hummed over the cobblestones as it carried them back through the lantern-lit streets, the Astor House's clamour fading like a distant echo. Emily leaned against the velvet squabs, Eliza dozing against her shoulder, the girl's curls tickling her neck. Alexander Thorne sat close, his hand still clasped in hers, the warmth of it a quiet anchor amid the night's triumph. The envelope from the carriage floor lay unopened on the seat, Crow's parting shot, perhaps a desperate plea or threat. But for now it could wait. The air between them hummed with unspoken possibility, the city's pulse syncing with their own. By morning, the threads of justice tightened. Thorne's lawyers descended on the brownstone like hawks, armed with the ledger and witness statements. Harlan Crow faced the full weight of the law, indictments for fraud, embezzlement, and tampering with rail contracts. Tammany's grip slipped. Reformist prosecutors, emboldened by the Sun's headlines, dragged him before a grand jury. No trial yet, but the consequences landed swift. Crow's assets froze, his Bowery saloon shuttered, his stake in the ward seized. Whispers spread through the markets, exiled to a dingy boarding house upstate, stripped of influence. His name poison in every club and counting house. Finkel, his lackey, slunk away too, arrested for extortion, his threats dissolving like morning fog. The antagonist's fall was total, a public reckoning that left the streets cleaner, the rails safer. Emily watched from the parlour window as constables hauled crates from Crow's old office, the autumn sun glinting off their badges. Relief washed over her, mingled with a fierce satisfaction. No more shadows chasing her steps. Thorne joined her, his reflection steady in the glass. "It's over," he said softly, his voice carrying the gravel of exhaustion and release. "You started this fire, Emily. The papers call you the Railroad Avenger." She turned, meeting his eyes. The transformation shone in him. The stern magnate softened, his broad shoulders relaxed, lines around his mouth eased into something like peace. No longer the isolated widower, but a man stepping into light. And her, the tenement widow, had found her voice. Compassion fueling leadership, her hands no longer calloused from endless sewing, but poised for purpose. "We did it," she corrected, a small smile breaking through. "For Jacob, for all the families crushed under wheels like these." The legal knots unravelled further that week. Thorne's aunt, once so quick to condemn, arrived by train from Boston, her trunk heavy with apologies wrapped in silk. "I misjudged," she admitted over tea, her silver hair pinned severely but eyes warm. "You've mended more than reputations." She repositioned herself as ally, pledging funds for Eliza's future, a finishing school in Paris, perhaps. The servants, too, found reward. Bridget promoted to head housemaid, her lilt now carrying authority. The butler received a bonus, his gaunt frame filling out with better meals. Even Mrs. Pendleton sent an invitation, not laced with barbs, but genuine, a charity luncheon to honor brave women of the age. Family ties sealed in quiet rituals. One crisp afternoon, Thorne led Emily to the brownstones' rear garden, where autumn leaves carpeted the gravel paths like fallen gold. Eliza and Noah scampered ahead, gathering them into piles, their laughter a balm. No grand gestures, no rings shadowed by old losses. Instead, Thorne knelt by a stone bench, unearthing a small box from the earth. Jacob's doing. He'd learned, a time capsule from their rail days. Inside, a simple gold band, unadorned, engraved with "Forward." "Not from my past," Thorne said, slipping it onto her finger. "Ours, if you'll have it." Emily's breath caught, the metal cool against her skin. Free choice between equals, no debts, no duties binding them. She nodded, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. Yes. Their lips met then, soft and sure, a kiss born of love's quiet bloom, not passion's storm but enduring warmth. Eliza clapped, Noah whooped, the horizon stretching open before them, a future woven from shared scars and dreams. Legacy took root swiftly. With Crow's downfall exposing the rot, Thorne funneled profits into reform. Emily spearheaded it, a school for rail workers' children on the Lower East Side, bricks laid where tenements once crumbled. Classrooms rang with lessons in reading and rights, funded by subscriptions from barons shamed into generosity. She led the opening, her voice steady before a crowd of families, dignitaries nodding approval. "Education builds tracks that last," she declared. Noah at her side in a new wool coat, Eliza reciting a poem on justice. The new equilibrium settled, no gilded cage, but a bridge between worlds. Thorne's mills hummed with fair wages, unions gaining ground without strikes. Their home expanded, wedding vows exchanged in a simple Gramercy chapel, whispers of a child on the way. Yet as winter's first snow dusted the schoolyard months later, a soft knock came at Emily's office door. A letter postmarked from upstate, Crow's hand, penitent and frail. "You've won more than my ruin," it read. "Use my silence for good." A hook to deeper tales, perhaps, a visit to the fallen, or a final confession. But Emily folded it away, turning to the window. Outside, children laughed in the fresh light, horizons endless. Love had endured. Transformed, a legacy etched in stone and stories, the Gilded Age bending toward gold, untainted by greed. The first snowflakes of another Christmas Eve danced past the frost-laced windows of the Hargrove Thorne home, a sturdy Victorian overlooking the Hudson's gentle curve. 10 years had woven their quiet magic since that fateful night in the tenement, transforming the brownstone's echoes into a haven of laughter and light. Emily stood by the hearth, stirring a pot of mulled cider, its cinnamon scent mingling with the pine from the grand tree in the hall. At 42, her auburn hair held threads of silver, but her eyes shone with the same fire that had toppled empires of greed. The lines around her mouth spoke of joys earned, not just sorrows borne. Noah, now 17, burst through the back door, cheeks ruddy from the cold, arms laden with firewood. Tall and broad like his father had been, he shook snow from his cap, grinning at the sight of the table set with turkey, plum pudding and cranberry relish, feasts once dreamed of in whispers. "Mama, the school's carolers are starting up. Should I fetch Eliza?" Aye. He glanced at the bundle in her arms, his smile softening. Their daughter, little Clara, named for Alexander's lost wife, gurgled contentedly, her tiny fists waving at the flames. Born 3 years after their wedding, she was the living seal of love's endurance, a bridge between past and promise. Emily nodded, pressing a kiss to Clara's forehead. "Go on, but bundle up. The wind bites sharper than it did back in the city." Noah dashed off, his boots thudding on the oak floors. The house expanded over the years with wings for guests and a library vast as Thorne's old study, hummed with family. Upstairs, Eliza, now 20, practiced scales on the pianoforte, her fingers dancing over keys, worn smooth by a decade of lessons and recitals. Orphaned no more, she'd blossomed into a young woman of poise and purpose, her auburn curls pinned elegantly, the silver locket still a constant at her throat. Alexander entered from the study, his step slower now at 58, the weight of mills and reforms etching deeper lines on his face, yet his dark eyes lit with warmth as he wrapped an arm around Emily's waist, pulling her close. The gold band on her finger, simple and forward-facing, caught the firelight, a relic unearthed from Jacob's hidden box, worn through weddings and winters. Their union, forged in the Astor house's chaos, had weathered storms of its own. The birth of Clara amid a rail strike, the lean year when floods halted shipments, but love had held, deepening like aged whiskey. Tender glances over breakfast, shared silences on porch swings, hands clasped in prayer each Sunday. "Smells like victory," Alexander murmured, his voice a rumble softened by time. He nuzzled her neck, the gesture intimate, unhurried. Emily leaned into him, the familiar scent of his pipe tobacco and wool evoking memories. The carriage ride home after Crow's Fall, their first kiss in the garden under April blooms. Marriage had come quietly, in that Gramercy chapel, with Eliza as witness and Noah scattering petals. No fanfare, just vows between equals, sealing a partnership that rebuilt worlds. Down the hall, portraits lined the walls, not stern ancestors, but family. Noah at 10, grinning atop a locomotive, Eliza at her Paris debut, gowns swirling like a comet. Clara's first steps. Captured in oils by a wandering artist, the changes rippled outward, social tides shifted by their hands. The school Emily founded on the Lower East Side had grown into a network, classrooms from Brooklyn to Buffalo, teaching rail children's sons and daughters not just letters, but rights and reckonings. No more sweatshops swallowing dreams, unions, once sparks in the dark, now forged contracts with barons like Alexander, who poured fortunes into fair wages and safety rails. The Gilded Age's shine had dulled, its underbelly exposed, thanks to one widow's ledger and a magnate's resolve. Yet prices had been paid, shadows lingering in the light. Harlan Crow, broken and bedridden in his upstate exile, had penned that final letter years ago, a confession Emily used to fuel reforms, but one that haunted Alexander in quiet nights. "He paid with everything," Alexander had said once, staring at the Hudson's flow. Lost his name, his health, a shell of the man who thought greed eternal. Finkel rotted in Sing Sing, his threats turned to regrets in chain gangs. Even allies bore scars. The Sun's editor, hounded by lawsuits until his paper folded, now taught journalism in Emily's schools, his fire undimmed. And Jacob's ghost, honored in a plaque at the First Academy, his truths etched in bronze, for the tracks that carry us forward. Eliza descended the stairs, her dress a soft wool of forest green, hand trailing the banister. "The carolers are here. Noah's leading them, says it's tradition now." She scooped Clara from Emily's arms, cooing as the baby laughed. Alexander watched, pride swelling. Eliza's path had forked toward advocacy, her speeches at assemblies echoing Emily's stand, fighting for women's votes, orphanages free of corruption. No suitors yet, but her heart seemed set on a young engineer from the mills, a boy with Jacob's honest eyes. They gathered on the porch as dusk deepened, snowflakes swirling like confetti from heaven. Noah's voice rose clear, silent night, weaving through the chill, joined by neighbors. Former tenement folk, now homeowners, faces fuller, eyes brighter. Alexander pulled Emily aside, his breath warm against her ear. 10 years, and every day with you feels like that first knock on your door. A miracle, wrapped in thorns. She turned, cupping his face, the kiss they shared soft, nostalgic, a reaffirmation amid the carols. Clara reached for the snow, tiny fingers grasping at flakes that melted on her skin. The family linked arms, singing along, the river's murmur a backdrop to their harmony. Love had not just resisted time, it had conquered it, blooming in legacies of stone and spirit, who paid dearly. The greedy, their thrones toppled. But for the Hargroves and Thorns, the cost yielded riches, a home alive with voices, a world mended stitch by stitch. As the last note faded, Emily whispered a prayer for Jacob, the fever's victim who started it all. The stars emerged, clear and countless, promising eternities yet to unfold. As the carolers' voices trailed into the night, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies against the deepening snow, Emily lingered on the porch, the chill nipping at her shawl, but failing to pierce the warmth blooming in her chest. 10 years had etched their stories into the very beams of this home, turning what began as a desperate knock on a tenement door into a tapestry of triumph and tenderness. Alexander's arm encircled her waist, steady as the river's flow, while Clara cooed from Eliza's arms, oblivious to the legacy she inherited, a world reshaped by courage, where the Gilded Age's harsh edges had softened under the hammer of justice. Reflecting on it all, Emily saw the lessons clear as the Hudson's winter gleam. First, that hope, fragile as a candle in a draught, could ignite revolutions when fanned by unyielding spirit. Jacob's hidden truths, her stand in the Astor House's glare, Alexander's quiet evolution from magnate to partner, they proved that one voice, raised against corruption's tide, could flood the shadows with light. No empire of greed endured when honesty forged the rails beneath it. Second, love wasn't a grand opera of passion, but a daily choice, enduring through storms and silences, binding families across divides of class and loss. Theirs had weathered scandals and strikes, emerging stronger, a testament that true partnership lifted all, from the lowliest worker to the highest boardroom. And third, redemption came not in isolation but in action, turning personal scars into communal shields. The schools, the fair contracts, the orphans finding homes, these were the fruits of refusing despair, of choosing forward motion over fear. Harlan Crow's fall, once a villain's throne, now served as cautionary soil for growth, his confessions fueling reforms that echoed nationwide. Prices paid by the ruthless yielded bounties for the resilient, proving that integrity's cost was far outweighed by its yield. As the family gathered inside, the fire crackling anew, Emily raised her cider glass in a silent toast to the journey. The room filled with chatter, Noah recounting his latest engineering sketches, Eliza planning a suffrage rally come spring, Alexander sharing tales of the mill's latest safety innovations. Clara's laughter bubbled like the cider's spice, a promise of generations unscarred by the old greeds. This was their equilibrium, not perfection, but purpose, woven from threads of loss and love. Yet even in this piece, Emily felt the pull of stories untold, horizons beckoning like the river's bend. What other widows waited in shadowed tenements, their sons' eyes hollow with hunger? What magnates hid hearts ready to bridge worlds? The night deepened, stars pricking the velvet sky, and she wondered at the miracles yet to unfold. If this tale stirred your soul as it did mine in the telling, pause and reflect. What fire burns in you to challenge the injustices of your day? Share in the comments below what touched you most, the spark of hope on that Christmas Eve, the roar of justice in the ballroom, or the quiet endurance of love through the years. Let your words inspire others, just as Emily's did. And if you made it to this heartfelt close, type forward in the comments, a nod to that simple engraving on her ring, a signal you've journeyed the full path and stand ready for more. Your voice helps light the way for tales like this to reach farther shores. Dive deeper into eras of grit and glory with my other stories. Check the cards for narratives of unsung heroes in America's forging fires. Hit like if the lessons lingered. Subscribe for fresh chapters of emotion and triumph every week. Until next time, carry that fire forward.